Good evening, everyone. Before we begin, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Every comment helps these disturbing stories find their way back to you. Now, let's step into the darkness. If you've never heard of Mill Creek, I'm not surprised. It's not the kind of place anyone goes to on purpose. It's a dot on a map. Just a handful of cracked streets lined with tired little houses, a diner that always smells like burnt coffee, and a gas station that looks like it hasn't been updated since the 70s. We had one blinking traffic light in the center of town, and most nights, after 10 o'clock, you could walk through Main Street and not see another soul. People called it safe, comfortable, but I always felt something else in the air there, like the whole town was holding its breath, especially at night. I'd grown up there, moved away for a while, and then ended up right back again. Cheap rent does that to you. I was renting this little one-story house on Pine Street. Pine wasn't much to look at. Rows of houses that all looked the same, fences leaning sideways, porches with swings that had rusted chains and seats that creaked if you tried to sit on them. It was the kind of place where people waved out of habit, but no one really knew each other anymore. A shell of a neighborhood. And it was on Pine Street that the blackout started. The first time, I thought it was just a glitch. I'd fallen asleep on the couch with the TV still buzzing. It was late, close to 3 a.m, when suddenly everything cut out. The hum of the fridge, the glow of the TV, even the streetlight outside, gone. It startled me, but I wasn't panicked. Old houses, old wiring. Stuff happens. But then I noticed something strange. Through my window, I could see across the railroad tracks to the next neighborhood. And over there, their lights were still on. Porch lamps glowing, TVs flickering through curtains, a faint glow spilling out onto driveways. It was just Pine Street that went black. I sat there in the silence, waiting. 6 minutes passed. And then, just like that, everything snapped back. The TV blared to life, the fridge kicked in, the clock on the stove beeped. Like nothing had ever happened. I shrugged it off. Weird, but not terrifying. Not yet. But the next night, it happened again. Same time. 3:01 a.m. sharp. 6 minutes of silence, then everything back to normal. And then again the night after that. By the fourth night, I wasn't laughing anymore. I decided to test it. I set an alarm for 2:50 a.m., brewed a pot of coffee, and sat at the window with the lights off waiting. When the clock on my phone hit 3:01, everything cut out. And I realized right away this wasn't just a power outage. The darkness felt wrong. It wasn't just the absence of light. It was heavy. Thick, like it pressed against the glass. The sound outside disappeared too. No crickets, no wind, not even the faint hum of the highway a mile out. Just silence. And then I saw them. At first I thought I was imagining it, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see them clearly. Figures, 4 of them, standing at the far end of the street. They weren't neighbors. They weren't moving. Just tall, thin shapes perfectly still lined up under the dead streetlight. I sat frozen, staring. My coffee cooled in my hands, and then, right at 3:07, the light snapped back. The figures were gone. The next morning, I mentioned it to my neighbor Paul. He lived 2 doors down, a retired mechanic who spent every sunrise on his porch with a mug of black coffee. I laughed when I told him about our scheduled blackout. But Paul didn't laugh. He just stared into his cup for a long moment, then said something that chilled me more than the blackout itself. Keep your curtains closed. That was it. No explanation, just that. And the way he said it, it wasn't advice. It was warning, but I didn't listen. The next night, I stayed up again. I couldn't help it. Curiosity was eating me alive. At 3:01, the blackout hit, and just like before, the silence swallowed everything, and the figures were back. This time, there were 5, standing in different spots. One by the vacant lot, another in the middle of the street, 2 clustered near the stop sign, and 1 in a neighbor's yard. They didn't move, Didn't sway or fidget. They were just there. And then at 3:07, the power returned, and they were gone. But the next night, there were 7. And the night after that, 3. It didn't matter how many. They were always there, always standing in the dark, waiting, and always gone when the lights came back. By now, I wasn't sleeping. I'd show up to work with bloodshot eyes, struggling to focus. People asked if I was sick. I lied and said I had insomnia. But the truth was, I couldn't stop watching. I even tried recording it. I set my phone up on the windowsill one night, camera aimed at the street. But when I checked the footage in the morning, all it showed was darkness. No figures, no silence. Just a dead, empty street. I started asking questions around town. Not directly. I wasn't stupid enough to blurt it out. But in casual conversations, I asked Grace, the waitress at the diner, if the power ever flickered at her place. She froze for a second, then said no, and then she changed the subject so fast it was like she hadn't heard me. I asked Sheriff Miller, who I'd gone to high school with. He laughed, said the grid was ancient, that I was spooking myself, but his laugh didn't reach his eyes. And Paul stopped speaking to me altogether. Wouldn't wave, wouldn't nod, just sat on his porch staring into his mug like I wasn't even there. The silence from everyone else made me feel like I was the only one who noticed, or the only one willing to talk about it. Then came the night I made the mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wanted proof. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that it wasn't real. But instead of watching from behind the safety of glass, I opened the front door. The silence outside was worse than I imagined. It pressed against my ears, heavy and unnatural. And they were closer, 5 of them, lined up directly across the street. My chest tightened. My breath felt too loud, echoing in my own ears. I gripped the porch railing, too scared to move. And then one of them stepped forward. Just one. But it was enough. The slow, deliberate scrape of a foot against asphalt. I panicked, slammed the door shut so hard the frame rattled, locked it, pressed my back against it, and stayed there, frozen, until the lights returned at 3:07 and the fridge hummed back to life. When I finally forced myself to look outside, the street was empty. The next morning, I told myself it had to be a nightmare, that I'd imagined the step, the sound, the movement. But when I stepped outside, my blood ran cold. At the bottom of my porch steps, pressed deep into the dirt, was a footprint. Long, narrow, and it wasn't facing away from my house. It was facing toward it. After I saw that footprint in my yard, I didn't step outside after dark for a week. Every night, I sat awake in my living room, the curtains drawn, clutching the kitchen knife I kept by my side. I told myself not to look, not to check, not to give them the satisfaction. But every night, when the clock hit 3:01, the lights went out. And every night, the silence fell. It wasn't like normal quiet. It was suffocating, like the whole world was holding its breath, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. And in that silence, I could feel them. Even if I didn't look, I knew they were there, watching, waiting. I finally broke one night. Curiosity clawed its way past fear, and I couldn't resist. I peeled back the curtain just an inch, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. They weren't at the end of the street anymore. They weren't even in the yard. They were on my porch. 3 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder, just a few feet from the window. The blackout stretched on, and in that black weight of silence, one of them tilted its head, slow, unnatural, like its neck was made of rope instead of bone. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the curtain. My hands shook so badly I thought the knife would slip from my grip. At 3:07, the power returned. The porch was empty. The next morning, I went to Paul. I didn't care if he ignored me. I needed answers. "Paul," I said, my voice breaking. "What are they? What do they want?" He didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes on the ground. Finally, after what felt like forever, he whispered, "They come for anyone who watches too long." I wanted to scream at him, shake him, demand more. But before I could, his front door opened. His wife stood there in her robe, pale, her eyes sunken. She looked at me like she'd already been to a funeral, and she said quietly, "Stop asking, please." Then she pulled him inside and shut the door. I thought maybe the sheriff would finally take me seriously, so I drove straight to his office. Miller leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, as I spilled everything. The figures, the blackouts, the footprint on my porch. When I finished, he sighed. "Lock your doors. Don't look out your windows. That's all you can do." That was it. No patrol car, no investigation, just a dismissal. But as I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of something on his desk. A stack of reports, each one with a different address from Pine Street. And every one of them filed at 3:01 a.m. That night, I tried to follow his advice. I sat in the kitchen, lights off, knife in hand. I told myself I wouldn't look, I wouldn't listen. But the silence was unbearable. And then came the sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming up my porch steps. I held my breath, gripping the knife so hard my palm ached. The doorknob rattled once, then again. And then a voice, low, distorted, like a broken radio. "Let us in." I froze. The words scraped at my brain like claws. "Let us in." The blackout stretched on endlessly. I pressed myself into the corner of the kitchen, too afraid to breathe. When the power snapped back, the voice was gone. The porch was empty. But the smell of damp earth lingered inside the house. I couldn't take it anymore. The next day, I packed a bag, called my sister in Wichita, and told her I was coming. But when I stepped outside to load my car, I froze. Every yard on Pine Street was covered in footprints, pressed deep into the dirt, into flower beds, across driveways, and all of them pointed the same direction, toward the houses, toward us. I didn't care. I got in my car and drove. I didn't look back until I hit the highway. But leaving Mill Creek didn't save me, because now, every night at 3:01, no matter where I am, the power flickers. Sometimes just for a second, sometimes longer. And in that silence, I can feel them, closer, waiting, and I know one night they won't stop at the porch. Coldbrook, Alabama is the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving through. A 2-lane highway cuts past a scattering of storefronts, a diner, a post office that looks more like a shed, and not much else. There's no welcome sign, no reason to stop. To outsiders, it's just another dot in the rural South. But to people who grew up there, it was everything. Small, insular, a little suffocating, but familiar. Everyone knew your business before you even told them, and secrets didn't stay secret for long. At least, most of them didn't. Coldbrook had one landmark, the water tower. It stood at the north end of town, just past the high school football field and the abandoned rail spur. The tower hadn't been used since the mid-90s, when a new system was built, but it remained, rusted and skeletal, a constant silhouette against the sky. From anywhere in town, you could see it rising above the trees, its legs streaked brown, where paint had peeled away, the tank at the top leaning slightly like it was too tired to keep standing. When I was little, we all heard the stories. They said if you passed by the tower at night, you'd hear voices calling your name. Sometimes it was faint, sometimes urgent, but always yours. Kids dared each other to go up close, to put their hands on the ladder or press their ear against the metal. Some swore they heard it. Others came back laughing, saying it was just the wind. Adults always brushed it off. But what stuck with me wasn't what they said. It was the way they looked when the tower came up. Their eyes shifted away, their mouths clamped shut. No one wanted to talk about it. I left Coldbrook for a while after high school, tried to find something bigger in Birmingham, but money has a way of pulling you back to places you thought you'd escaped. By 22, I was back in Coldbrook, working nights at the only grocery store in the next county over. Closing shifts meant I was usually driving home at 3 in the morning. The fastest way back cut right past the tower. The first night it happened, I had the window down. It was late October, cool and damp. That kind of night air that smelled like wood smoke and wet leaves. My headlights washed over the weeds at the base of the tower, and that's when I heard it. My name, not shouted, not spoken, whispered, drawn out, almost pleading. I froze. My radio was off. The road was empty. And yet the voice was clear as day, carried on the night air. It didn't sound like someone else. It sounded like me. I jerked the window closed and pressed the gas harder, eyes fixed on the road until my house came into view. I told myself it was a trick. The tower groaning in the wind. Maybe the sound of an animal carried just right. But the next night, it happened again. Same spot. Same time. This time, there wasn't just one voice. There were two. They overlapped. One faint, one stronger. Both saying my name in unison. By the third night, it was a chorus. Dozens of whispers, layered and distorted, every one of them my voice. I stopped opening the window, but it didn't matter. The sound seeped through the glass, muffled but undeniable. The more I ignored it, the louder it seemed to get. I started taking the back way home, winding through farm roads and neighborhoods, adding 15 minutes to my drive just to avoid the tower. But fear doesn't vanish when you change direction. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, certain that if I closed my eyes, I'd hear it again. And eventually I did. I woke one night to the sound of whispers bleeding through my walls. At first I thought it was a dream, but when I sat up, I could still hear them. My name, said over and over, overlapping, echoing like it was trapped inside the wood itself. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices weren't outside. They were in me. I lay there until dawn, shaking, waiting for it to stop. By morning, I told myself I'd imagined it. That exhaustion was making me hallucinate, but then it happened again the next night, and the one after. Each time the whispers grew louder. Each time I swore I could make out words besides my name, though they slipped away before I could catch them. It wasn't just voices. I began hearing footsteps too. Slow, dragging steps circling the house, gravel crunching outside my window. I'd throw the curtains open and see nothing. Just darkness, my yard empty. But the sound kept going, circling, deliberate. And always, after the footsteps faded, came the drip. The faint, steady sound of water dripping somewhere it shouldn't be. At work, I was falling apart. Customers noticed the bags under my eyes. My manager pulled me aside, asked if I'd been drinking. I laughed and said no, but my hands shook when I bagged groceries, and I felt eyes on me even in broad daylight. I told myself I wouldn't say anything to anyone. But after a week, without real sleep, I broke. One morning, sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, I told her. I told her everything. About the voices by the tower. About hearing my name through the walls. About the footsteps. Her face drained of color. Her mug rattled against the saucer. She whispered one thing. Don't feed it. When I asked what she meant, she snapped, her voice cracking. Don't say another word. Don't even think about it. Then she pushed her chair back and walked out of the room, shutting her bedroom door. I sat there alone, the silence heavier than it had ever been. That was the first time I saw my mom afraid. I tried asking my uncle a few days later. He'd lived in Coldbrook his whole life, the kind of man who always had a story or an answer. I caught him outside the feed store and asked straight out if he'd ever heard anything near the tower. He froze, jaw tightening, eyes darting to the street like he expected someone else to hear. Finally, he muttered, "The tower keeps count." Then he turned and walked away before I could ask what that meant. That phrase stuck in my head, replaying over and over. Keeps count. Keeps count of what? The nights grew worse. One night, I woke to the sound of dripping in my bedroom. I grabbed a flashlight, pushed open the door, and froze. A puddle had spread across the floor, rippling in the beam of my light. The ceiling was dry. The walls were dry. The water wasn't coming from above. It was seeping up through the floorboards. The whispers rose all around me, louder than ever, deafening, 100 overlapping voices saying my name. My own voice, echoing in a chorus. I dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, catching ripples on the water. And for a split second, I swore I saw faces staring up at me from beneath the surface. I slammed the door, pressed my back against it, heart racing. I covered my ears, but the voices drilled through. It took everything I had not to scream. When I opened the door again, minutes later, the floor was dry, the boards bare, the whispers gone. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself I'd dreamed it, but the soles of my socks were damp. Days bled together after that. I avoided people. I avoided the tower. I avoided sleep. My body was shutting down, my mind unraveling, but still the whispers came. Sometimes faint, sometimes loud, but always there. Always saying my name. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys, drove out to the edge of town and pulled over by the tower. The field was overgrown, the grass waist-high, the legs of the structure streaked brown with rust. The ladder rose into darkness, bolts corroded, rungs bent and slick. I stood there, staring up, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But another part of me, stupid, desperate, broken, needed to know, needed to see. If I faced it, maybe it would stop, maybe the whispers would end. I stepped into the weeds, the tower looming above me, the voices swelling in my head, and I knew then that part of me wasn't walking back out of that field the same. I should have turned back that night. Every instinct I had told me to. But when you've been broken down night after night, when whispers steal your sleep and water seeps up from the floors of your own bedroom, fear doesn't push you away anymore. It pulls you in. I crossed that overgrown field, weeds brushing against my jeans, my flashlight beam trembling in my hand. The closer I got, the stronger the voices grew. They weren't faint anymore. They weren't carried on the wind. They were in my head, vibrating in my skull, layered on top of each other like 100 versions of me were speaking at once. The legs of the tower rose into the dark like rusted bones. I touched one, and the metal was damp. My hand came away wet. I lifted the flashlight and saw droplets streaking down the beams, even though the sky was clear. It was sweating. The tower was sweating. I craned my neck to look up. The ladder stretched into the night, disappearing into shadow. My heart hammered as I reached for the first rung. It was slick with moisture, cold against my palm. For a long moment, I just stood there, my breath fogging in the air, the whispers pressing in from all sides. Then I started to climb. Each step groaned. Rust flaked beneath my grip. My shoes slipped once, sending a jolt of terror through me. But I held on. I kept climbing, rung after rung, until the hatch at the top came into view. The voices were deafening now. Not outside, not below. They were pouring out of the hatch, spilling into me, flooding every nerve. My name, my name, my name chanted over and over. With shaking hands, I reached up and pulled the hatch open. The stench hit me like a wall. Rot. Mildew. Something sour and metallic that made bile rise in my throat. I shone the flashlight inside. Water. The tank was half full, black liquid rippling as though disturbed by something moving below the surface. The beam of my light caught on shapes floating there. At first, I thought they were reflections. But then one turned, and I saw its face. My face. Dozens of them. Pale, bloated, eyes wide and unblinking, mouths moving silently beneath the water. Every single one was me. I stumbled back, nearly losing my grip. The flashlight slipped and clattered against the hatch, its beams skittering across the water, illuminating more and more faces. All identical. All mine. The whispers rose into a scream. I slammed the hatch shut, gasping for air, but the voices didn't stop. They poured through the metal, vibrating the rungs under my hands. My vision blurred, my head pounding as I scrambled back down the ladder. When my feet hit the ground, I ran. I don't remember pushing through the weeds. I don't remember unlocking my car. 1 second I was at the tower, the next I was flying down the highway, headlights cutting through empty darkness. The whispers followed me. I kept the radio blasting, windows rolled up, but underneath it all, I still heard them. My name, drawn out, overlapping, begging, mocking. When I stumbled into my house, slamming the door behind me, I thought I was safe. But the sound didn't fade. It was louder. I dropped to the floor, hands pressed over my ears, rocking like a child. The voices clawed at my skull, each one in my own tone, each one sounding like me, like I was splitting apart into 100 different versions. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. The quiet was worse. I lifted my head, ears ringing. The house was still, no whispers, no footsteps. For a moment I thought maybe it was over. Then I heard water, dripping. I turned. The kitchen sink faucet was running, though I hadn't touched it. The water poured steadily, and in its flow I saw my reflection. Only it didn't move with me. Its lips parted. And though the room was silent, I knew what it was saying. My name. I staggered back, knocking over a chair. The puddle from the sink spread across the floor, creeping toward my feet. I scrambled into the hallway, but water seeped from under the doors, bubbling up from the cracks in the floorboards. Everywhere I turned, it was there. My own face in every reflection, my own voice in every whisper. I fled into my bedroom, slamming the door. My chest heaved, my skin clammy. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, though I knew it was useless. That night, I didn't sleep. The water dripped, the floor creaked, and in the silence between my heartbeat and my breath, I could still hear them. The next day, I packed. I didn't care where I went, anywhere but Cold Brook, anywhere away from that tower. I told my mom I was leaving. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't even look surprised. All she said was, "It won't matter. Once you hear them, you can't unhear them." I drove north, past Birmingham, past Huntsville, past the state line, until Cold Brook was just a memory in the rear view. I thought distance would save me. It didn't. That night, in a cheap motel 2 states away, I woke to the sound of water dripping in the bathroom. My stomach dropped. I got up, pushed open the door, and froze. The mirror above the sink was fogged, though the air was cold, and written in the condensation was my name. Behind me in the glass stood a figure. It looked like me. And when I turned, the room was empty. It's been months since I left. I've moved twice, changed jobs, cut ties with everyone back home. But it doesn't matter. Every night, around 3 in the morning, it begins again. Whispers bleeding through the walls. Water seeping from nowhere. My name spoken over and over, in voices that sound exactly like mine. I know what I saw in that tower. I know those faces weren't just reflections. They were pieces of me. Parts of me pulled away and drowned. And I know the tower keeps count. I just don't know what number I am. I had been in Rutland, Vermont for about 3 months when I found the house on Willow Lane. Rutland was quiet, tucked between rolling hills, with long winters that seemed to smother sound. I'd taken a job at the hospital, nothing glamorous, clerical work, filing, moving papers. But it paid steady, and after years of drifting from one temp gig to another, I was desperate for something that felt permanent. The only problem was rent. Apartments in town were either run down or way out of my budget. That's when I saw the notice at the library bulletin board. Room for rent, quiet house, call after 6. The number was handwritten in neat, shaky script. When I called, a man answered. His voice was low, a little weary, like someone who didn't talk on the phone much. His name was Frank. He said the room was available. He didn't need much money, just someone reliable. I could come by that evening if I wanted to see it. The house was on the edge of town, at the far end of Willow Lane. The street curved past a patch of woods before ending in a cul-de-sac. Frank's house was the last one, set back from the road with a narrow gravel drive and a sagging porch. The paint was chipped, the shutters crooked, but the windows were lit, warm against the growing dusk. Frank met me at the door. He was in his late 60s, maybe early 70s, tall but stooped, with a gray beard and eyes that looked like they carried too many winters. He shook my hand, and there was a gentleness in the way he spoke that put me at ease. The room was upstairs, small but clean. A bed, a dresser, a desk. The rent he asked for was barely half of what I'd been paying to sleep on a friend's couch. I told him I'd take it. He nodded, almost relieved, like he'd been afraid no one would. As I unpacked that first night, I noticed little things. The hallway walls were lined with photos, most of them of a young girl, maybe 10 or 11. Dark hair, bright smile, missing front tooth in one picture, a birthday cake in another. The frames stopped after a certain point, like time had frozen. I asked Frank casually if the girl was his granddaughter. He paused, then said, "My daughter." Her name was Claire. "Was?" I asked before I could stop myself. His eyes dropped. "She passed. A long time ago." I muttered an apology, embarrassed, and he waved it off. But his voice had gone soft, heavy, like the words still hurt to speak even after all those years. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about the photos. The way her smile lit up the frame. The way Frank's voice faltered when he said her name. I didn't know then how much that name was going to matter. The first few weeks in the house were quiet. Frank kept to himself. He made coffee in the mornings, read the paper at the kitchen table, and sometimes sat on the porch in the evenings, staring at the trees like he was listening for something. He was polite, always asking about my day, but never prying. The house itself had that old wood smell, like pine soaked with time. The floors creaked, the radiators hissed, but it felt safe enough. Until the night I heard footsteps on the stairs. It was close to midnight. I was in my room, reading with the lamp on, when I heard the floorboards groan outside. Not just once, but a steady rhythm. Small, light steps. Too light to be Frank's. They climbed slowly, one after another, pausing just outside my door. I held my breath. The hall was silent. Then the steps turned, padding toward the end of the hallway. Toward the room opposite mine, the one Frank had kept shut since I moved in. The doorknob rattled softly. Then silence. I opened my door an inch, peering into the hallway. Nothing. The air was still. The next morning at breakfast, I mentioned it. Frank froze halfway through buttering his toast. His eyes flicked up to mine, sharp in a way I hadn't seen before. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you'll hear Claire. Don't be afraid. She still comes home." I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. But he didn't smile. He just looked down at his plate and changed the subject. I tried to forget about it, but the sounds kept coming. Some nights it was footsteps. Other nights I heard humming. A girl's voice, faint, carrying through the walls. Once I woke to the sound of crayon scratching. In the morning, the fridge was covered with drawings, bright scribbles of houses and trees taped up neatly. I hadn't put them there. Frank saw me staring and said, "She likes to draw." His voice cracked, just slightly. I should have left then. I should have packed my things and walked away. But there was something in Frank's eyes. Grief so raw, it never healed. And something in me, the part that always wanted to fix things to help, kept me rooted. I told myself it was just an old man clinging to memory. That grief made people believe strange things, that if I ignored it, it would fade. But it didn't fade. One night, I woke to my door opening. Slowly. Quietly. I froze under the blanket, staring at the sliver of light widening on the floor. A shadow stretched across the room. Small, child-sized. It stood there for a moment, then moved. The bed dipped, as though someone had climbed onto it. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The air grew cold, heavy. And then, right by my ear, a whisper. "Don't take my daddy." I bolted upright. The room was empty. The door was closed. My chest heaved as I tried to convince myself I'd been dreaming. But on the pillow beside me was a single crayon. Blue. Broken in half. The next morning, I tried to tell Frank. I thought maybe he'd explain or at least reassure me. He just looked away and said, "She doesn't like change." I pressed him. "Frank, she's gone. You know that, right? You know she's gone." His hands trembled as he gripped his coffee mug. For the first time, his voice wasn't soft. It was sharp, almost angry. "You don't know what it's like to lose a child. Don't tell me she's gone." The room went silent. I didn't push further. But inside, fear had replaced pity, because whatever was in that house wasn't just grief. It was alive, and it knew my name. That was only the beginning. The nights grew longer, the footsteps louder. The drawings appeared more often. Crayons lined up neatly on the counter, pictures of a stick-figure man holding hands with a stick-figure girl, and sometimes a third figure scrawled in black crayon, looming behind them. Once, I found my clothes drawer open, shirts folded with a child's care, but tucked among them was a note in childish handwriting. "You can't stay. He's mine." I felt sick reading it. When I showed Frank, he just whispered, "She doesn't understand." I wanted to scream at him, to shake him and demand answers, but the look on his face stopped me. He wasn't malicious. He wasn't in denial. He was broken, and his grief had teeth. The night it truly became unbearable, I woke to the sound of crying, soft, hiccuping sobs echoing through the house. I followed it, heart pounding down the hallway. The door to Claire's old room, the one always kept shut, was ajar. I pushed it open. Inside, moonlight spilled through lace curtains. The room was frozen in time. A child's bedspread with faded flowers, shelves lined with dolls, a desk with a jar of crayons. Dust coated everything, but the air was cold, fresh, as if someone had just been there. And in the corner, I saw her. A girl, knees tucked to her chest, shoulders shaking as she cried. Her hair fell over her face, but I could hear her whispers. "He's mine. He's mine. He's mine." When she lifted her head, her eyes locked on me, hollow, burning. And I knew then, I wasn't just dealing with Frank's grief. I was dealing with hers. That night, I didn't sleep. I understood something I couldn't put into words. Claire was gone, but she hadn't left. She would never let anyone else stay. And after that night in her room, I knew something had to change. Every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the shadows felt like her watching, waiting. I tried telling myself it was exhaustion, that loneliness was twisting my thoughts. But the broken crayon on my pillow, the childish note in my drawer, the cold whisper by my ear, those weren't imagination. They were real. And the worst part was Frank. He didn't act afraid. He acted like this was normal, like a child's ghost crying in the night was just part of life. He made space for it, like setting a place at the table for someone who would never sit there again. The morning after I saw her in the room, I found him at the kitchen table staring into his coffee. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders hunched. He looked like a man worn down to the bone. "She doesn't want you here," he said quietly before I even opened. I froze. "Frank, you hear her too, don't you?" He didn't answer at first. Then slowly he nodded. "She's all I have left." His voice cracked. "If she wants the house, she can have it. If she wants me, she can have me, but she doesn't want anyone else." His words chilled me. It wasn't grief anymore. It was devotion, twisted, broken devotion to something that wasn't alive anymore. I decided I had to leave. That night, I started packing. I thought, if I left quietly without saying a word, maybe she wouldn't notice. But she noticed. The first thing was the drawings. As I pulled clothes from the dresser, I found them tucked between shirts, slipped inside shoes. Each one was the same, a little girl and her father smiling, and beside them, a black scribbled figure with red eyes. On the last one, written in crayon at the bottom, were 3 words, "Go away now." The handwriting was shaky, uneven, like a child's, but the pressure of the crayon had cut deep into the paper, almost tearing it. I dropped it, my hands trembling. That was when the footsteps started. Up the stairs, slow, deliberate. The door to my room creaked open an inch. I held my breath, staring at that sliver of dark hallway. The crying began, soft at first, then louder, sobs that shook the walls, and then her voice, right outside the door. "Don't take him. Don't take my daddy." The doorknob rattled. I stumbled back, my heart slamming in my chest. "Please," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I was begging, her or myself. The crying stopped. Silence pressed in, heavy and absolute, and then the door flew open. The hallway was empty, but in the distance, down the stairs, I heard Frank's voice, calling softly. Claire, Claire, sweetheart, it's okay. I'm here. I went to him. I had to. He was standing in the living room, facing the wall. His arms were out like he was holding someone. His face was wet with tears. She's upset, he whispered. She thinks you're trying to take me away. My throat tightened. Frank, she's gone. She's not here anymore. You know that. He shook his head violently. Don't say that. She's here. She's always here. And then he turned to me, eyes wild. If you care about me, if you really care, you'll leave. Now, before she makes you. The air grew cold. Behind him, the family photographs on the wall rattled. One by one, they slid off their nails and crashed to the floor. I ran. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, knees tucked to her chest, whispering, "He's mine. He's mine." I wanted to pack, to get out of that house, but part of me couldn't. Because of Frank, he was alone, broken, drowning in grief that had hardened into something monstrous. If I left, he'd be alone with her forever. And I couldn't shake the thought. Was she really haunting the house, or was she just him? His grief made flesh, made sound, made terror. The answer didn't matter. Either way, he was lost. The final night, I woke to the sound of laughter. High, girlish laughter echoing through the house. I stumbled into the hallway. The door to Claire's room was wide open, light spilling out. Frank was inside, sitting on the bed. The sheets were pressed down beside him, indented as if someone were sitting there. He was smiling, tears streaking his cheeks. "She's happy tonight," he said softly. "She knows you're leaving." The air was icy. My breath puffed white, and then I heard her voice, right behind me. "Goodbye." I turned. The hallway was empty, but the door slammed shut, locking me inside with them. The lights flickered. The dolls on the shelves turned, faces blank, eyes fixed on me. The crayon jar toppled, spilling colors across the floor. And on the wall, in bright red crayon, words scrawled themselves, jagged and uneven. "He's mine," I screamed. Frank didn't move. He just sat there, holding invisible hands, humming a lullaby under his breath. The temperature dropped until my teeth chattered. Shadows thickened, filling the corners. And then I saw her. Not a shadow. Not a memory. A girl, pale and hollow-eyed, hair hanging limp, standing in front of me. Her small fist clenched, her mouth twisted in rage. "Go." The force of it threw me back against the door. I fumbled for the handle, but it wouldn't turn. She stepped closer, each footfall shaking the floor. Frank looked up, smiling like a man reunited with his love. "She doesn't want you here," he whispered. "You should go." The door flew open behind me. I stumbled out, racing down the stairs, through the front door, into the night air. I didn't stop running until Willow Lane was a smear behind me. I never went back. I never saw Frank again. A month later, I asked around town. They said he'd passed quietly in his sleep. Some said it was the loneliness. Others said it was peace. I know better. He didn't die alone. He died with her. And sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I think I hear it again. Light footsteps on the stairs. A child's whisper in the dark. "Don't take my daddy." And I know she's still out there, waiting for someone else to care about him, waiting to make them hers. I came to Harper's Mill in the fall of 2019. The job market had dried up where I was living, and when a maintenance position opened at an old paper factory in West Virginia, I jumped at it. Rent was cheap, the town was small, and after years of drifting, I thought maybe I'd finally have something steady. Harper's Mill wasn't on most maps. A cluster of houses, a single gas station, one diner, and a weathered church that seemed to hold the town together. The factory was the only real employer, and the men who worked there all had the same tired look, like they'd been stamped out of the same mold. What struck me most that first week was how quiet the town was at night. No dogs barking, no cars on the road, not even crickets, just stillness. a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed against the windows. People were polite but distant. At the diner, the waitress always smiled, but her eyes flicked toward the church every time the bell rang. Conversations cut short when I walked in. It was the kind of place where outsiders weren't unwelcome, but they were watched. The first time I heard about the funerals, I thought it was a joke. I was sitting at the diner when a man in coveralls leaned across the counter and asked the waitress what time the service was. She told him 8 sharp, same as always. Then she noticed me listening and changed the subject. That night, just before bed, I heard the church bell toll. 8 slow chimes, each one rolling over the stillness like thunder. I looked out the window and saw a procession of people walking down the road, candles in their hands, heading toward the church. Curiosity got the better of me. I threw on a jacket and followed at a distance. The entire town was there. Men, women, children. They filled the pews, faces solemn, eyes fixed forward. At the front of the church was a closed casket. The service was short. No eulogy, no hymns, just the pastor reading a single name from a leather-bound ledger. Then silence. I waited for the family of the deceased, for someone to cry, for any sign of grief. But the people just sat, staring at the casket like they were waiting for something. After 15 minutes, the bell rang again. Everyone stood, filed out, and walked home. The next morning, I asked around who had died. No one would answer me. A week later, I heard the bell again. 8 chimes, another procession, another service, another name read from the ledger. The next day, word spread quietly. An older man on the edge of town had been found in his bed, cold and still. His funeral had already been held the night before. That's when it sank in. The funerals weren't memorials. They were announcements. The town gathered the night before a death, and they always knew who it would be. I tried to push it out of my mind. People die. Small towns gossip. Maybe it was coincidence, but the pattern kept repeating. Every week or so, the bell tolled. The town gathered. A name was spoken. And by dawn, that person was gone. The strangeness gnawed at me. I asked one of my co-workers, a guy named Ray, how the town always knew. He gave me a look like I'd asked him to spit on a grave. "Best not to wonder," he said, and walked away. But I couldn't let it go. One night, I decided to see the ledger for myself. The church was never locked. The pastor, an old man named Whitaker, kept the doors open day and night. He said it was for the Lord, but I suspected it was more for the town. I slipped inside after midnight. The pews creaked under my weight, the air thick with the smell of wax and mildew. At the front, on the pulpit, sat the ledger, a massive book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it. Each page was lined with names, dates, every week stretching back decades. Some names had been crossed out, some not. I flipped to the most recent page. At the bottom was the name of the man who had died the week before, and below that, written in the same neat, careful hand, was another. I froze when I saw it. It was mine. For a long time, I just stared, my hands trembling against the paper. My name. My death already planned. My funeral already scheduled. The date was 3 days away. Panic surged through me. I slammed the book shut, heart pounding, and stumbled out into the night air. The town was still, but I felt eyes on me, watching from behind curtains. The next morning at the diner, conversations stopped when I walked in. People stared just a little too long. The waitress's smile was strained, her eyes flicking toward the church bell. I couldn't eat. I couldn't think. 3 days. That was all I had. I tried leaving, packed a bag, filled my tank, and drove toward the highway. But as I reached the edge of town, I saw them. The townspeople standing on the road, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the way. Their faces were calm, expressionless, but their eyes followed me as I slowed to a stop. One of them, a man I'd seen at the factory, stepped forward and tapped on my window. "It won't help," he said softly. "Best to come home. Best not to fight it." I turned the car around. The days crawled by. At work, no one spoke to me. At the diner, no one served me. It was as if the town had already decided I was gone. That night, I dreamed of the church, of lying in the casket, the lid closing above me, the sound of dirt hitting wood. I woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The whispers started the next day. At first, faint, a murmur in the walls, then clearer. Voices calling my name, rising and falling like a chant. No matter where I went, in my room, at the factory, even walking the empty streets, I heard them. Always the same words. 3 nights. 3 nights. By the time the second night came, I was unraveling. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching a kitchen knife, ears straining in the silence. The whispers were louder now, echoing in my skull. Every time I looked at the window, I swore I saw faces staring in. At midnight, the church bell rang. 8 slow chimes, and I knew it was for me. The sound didn't fade when it ended. It throbbed inside me, heavy as blood. I left every light on, the knife biting into my palm until my hand cramped. My heart thudded so hard I thought it might burst. Each echo of the bell felt like a nail in my coffin, or when the last echo faded, I heard movement outside. Slow footsteps, dozens of them. Gravel crunching, boots scuffing, a murmur of voices like a tide rolling past. I crept to the window. The townsfolk were walking toward the church, candles flickering in their hands. Every face was calm. Every step was deliberate. And then I saw Pastor Whitaker at the front, holding the ledger. I shut the curtains and backed away, my pulse hammering in my throat. They were gathering for me. My funeral before I was even dead. I told myself I wouldn't go, that I'd lock the door, hide in my room, survive until dawn. But the whispers started again, louder than before, pressing against the walls, vibrating in my bones, my name, over and over. It felt like the house itself was rejecting me, spitting me out. The doorknob rattled. I froze. Then, slowly, the front door swung open. Candles flickered in the hallway. Shadows stretched long across the floor. And a voice, calm, patient, called my name. Come along now. It's time. My body moved before my mind could stop it. Knife still clutched in my hand, I stepped into the night. The entire town was waiting. 100 faces turned toward me, blank but expectant. They parted silently, forming a path to the church. I wanted to run, to scream, to fight. But their eyes held me, cold, unyielding, as if they knew resistance was useless. I walked between them, my legs trembling, sweat slick on my palms. The church doors stood open, candles blazing inside. The casket sat at the front, polished wood gleaming. Empty, waiting. Pastor Whitaker stood beside it, the ledger open in his hands. He smiled when he saw me. Not kindly, not cruelly, just inevitability made flesh. Child of Harper's Mill, he said softly, your time has come. They led me down the aisle. The pews creaked under the weight of the townsfolk as they sat, silent as statues. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of wax and something else, something sour, metallic. I glanced at the casket. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement inside, a shadow shifting beneath the lid. No, I whispered. I'm not dead. I'm not. My voice broke. Whitaker closed the ledger and placed a hand on the casket. You will be, he said, and we will keep the balance. I stumbled back, knife raised. The townsfolk didn't move. They just stared, eyes reflecting the candlelight. What balance? I demanded, my voice cracking. Whitaker's smile widened. This town survives because we give what is owed. A life for the land. A soul for the soil. It has always been this way. It will always be this way. His words sank into me like ice. This isn't a funeral, I whispered. No, he said. It's an offering. The whispers surged, filling the church, echoing from the rafters. My name. My name. My name. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears, knife clattering to the floor. The casket creaked. The lid slid open. Inside wasn't a body. It was a hole. A yawning black void that seemed to swallow the candlelight, pulling the air from the room. The townsfolk bowed their heads. Whitaker extended his hand, It is time. I scrambled back, shaking my head. No. No, I won't. Hands gripped my shoulders. Strong, unyielding. Ray, my coworker, his face expressionless. The waitress, her smile gone, eyes blank. Neighbors, whose names I barely knew. They held me fast, lifting me like I was nothing. I screamed, kicked, fought. The knife lay on the floor, just out of reach. They carried me to the casket. The void inside pulsed, pulling at me, dragging me toward it. The whispers became a roar. My name, over and over, my own voice multiplied 100-fold. I looked to Frank. No, not Frank. He wasn't here. That was another story. Skip mistake, continue. I looked to Whitaker, desperation in my eyes. Please, I begged. I don't want to die. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. You don't, he whispered. Not really. You'll serve. Like the rest. And then they dropped me in. Darkness swallowed me. I fell, weightless, air tearing from my lungs. The whispers pressed against my skin, into my skull, until they weren't whispers anymore. They were screams. And then I saw them. Faces in the dark, pale, twisted, mouths open in silent agony. Dozens, hundreds. Eyes wide, staring, endless. All of them the lost, all of them offerings. Their mouths moved in unison. Welcome. I tried to scream, but the dark filled my throat. I woke on the floor of my room, gasping, drenched in sweat. The knife lay beside me. The curtains stirred in a wind I couldn't feel. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream. Then I heard the bell, 8 slow chimes, and from the kitchen I smelled wax and earth. On the table lay the ledger. My name was still written there. The date had been crossed out. Beside it, a new one. 1 week later. And underneath mine, another name. Someone else's. The offering wasn't over. It had only begun. The house across the street had been empty for years. It was one of those old, tired places with chipped paint and sagging gutters, a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind caught it. Nobody wanted it. The realtor's sign sat sun-faded and forgotten, and the neighbors had long since stopped asking when someone would finally buy it. So when a moving truck pulled up one Friday afternoon, I actually felt relieved. Empty houses in small towns get under your skin after a while. They look like holes in the neighborhood, like missing teeth. The man who stepped out of the truck didn't look remarkable. Mid-40s, tall, thinning hair, clean-shaven. He wore a gray windbreaker zipped all the way up despite the warmth, and his movements were steady, efficient. He carried boxes inside without hesitation, no wasted steps, no glances around. By evening, the house was lit for the first time in years. I told myself it was a good thing, a little life back on our street. But then I noticed something strange. That night, just before bed, I looked out the window. The man was sitting on the porch, not doing anything, just sitting there, facing the street. His posture was straight, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed forward. I figured he was tired from the move, maybe just catching a breath. But the next night, he was there again. And the next. Every evening, as soon as the sun dipped low, he came out to sit. Same chair, same posture, same blank stare across the street. At first, I thought it was quirky, a harmless routine. I even joked about it to a friend over the phone. But after a week, it started to feel different, because his porch faced mine. And when I sat in my living room, the blinds cracked just an inch, I realized his line of sight wasn't toward the street. It was toward me. I told myself I was imagining it. People sit outside all the time. Maybe he was watching the trees, or the horizon, or nothing at all, but I started noticing little things. The first was my routine. I'd usually head to bed around 11, but now, every night, I caught myself waiting. Just waiting for him to get up, to go inside, to end it. He never did. Midnight, 1 a.m., even 2. He sat there, motionless. And when I finally gave up and went to bed, I felt his eyes burning into the back of my skull. The second was my lights. I realized I only turned them on when he wasn't out there. I caught myself walking through my own house in the dark just to avoid being seen. The third was my thoughts. I don't know how else to say it, but I started thinking differently, questioning my own decisions, wondering how they looked from across the street. It was like he wasn't just watching me, he was guiding me. The first note appeared on my kitchen counter the second week. A scrap of lined paper folded neatly in half. On the front, in block letters, "You left the stove on." My stomach dropped. I had left it on just the night before, after heating soup. I'd woken to the smell of gas at 3 a.m., heart racing, windows flung open. I hadn't told anyone. The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. There was no signature. I checked the doors, the locks, the windows. All secure, nothing broken, nothing forced. But the note was there. And when I looked across the street that night, he was on the porch, hands folded, face unreadable. The second note came 3 days later. "You should call your sister." It made my throat tighten. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Not since the fight. And yet that morning, I'd woken with the thought of her heavy in my chest, guilty, ashamed. How could he know? I tore the note up, but the words stuck. That night, I sat with my phone in my hand, staring at her number, feeling like it wasn't even my idea anymore. I didn't call, but I felt like I'd disappointed him. The third note was the worst. "You don't sleep enough." When I found it, my hand shook. Because it wasn't wrong. I hadn't been sleeping. Not since he moved in. Not since the watching began. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. And for the first time, I wondered if he was right. Not just about the sleep, about everything. Maybe I really was careless with the stove. Maybe I really had abandoned my sister. Maybe I really did need someone watching, someone guiding. The thought terrified me. Because it didn't feel like my thought. I tried to confront him. One evening, just before sunset, I walked across the street. My pulse hammered, my palms slick with sweat. He was already on the porch waiting, his eyes lifting as I approached. "Hey," I said, forcing a laugh. "I'm your neighbor. Thought I'd welcome you." He didn't move, didn't smile, didn't blink. The silence stretched until my skin crawled. Finally, I said, "Look, I don't know what this is, but the notes..." He tilted his head just slightly. I stopped. The words died in my throat. Because in that instant, I felt it, like a hand in my chest, squeezing. And a thought slipped into my head, sharp and cold. "Don't mention the notes." I swallowed hard. My mouth went dry. Instead, I muttered, "Welcome to the neighborhood," and stumbled back across the street, shame burning in my face. From my window, I watched him, and I knew he was smiling. That night, the fourth note appeared. "You did the right thing." I ripped it to shreds, heart hammering, but deep down, a voice whispered that maybe he was right. Maybe I had done the right thing. Maybe I'd do it again. And after that, something in me shifted. I didn't want it to, but it did. It wasn't just that he was watching, or that he knew things he shouldn't. It was the way his silence bent my thoughts until they felt like his. At work, when I drifted in meetings, I imagined his eyes on me, steady, waiting. At the grocery store, I hesitated before choosing anything, picturing him on that porch, silent, disapproving. It felt like he was shaping me. And I hated how comforting it was to imagine someone else steering. The next note came in my bathroom. I stepped out of the shower, wiped the mirror, and there it was, taped to the glass. "Don't be late tomorrow." My heart seized. I had a doctor's appointment scheduled, one I'd been putting off for weeks. I hadn't told anyone about it. The next day, when my alarm went off, I didn't hit snooze. I didn't even think about it. I got up, dressed, and left early. And when the receptionist smiled and told me, "Right on time," I felt a sick twist of pride. I wasn't proud of myself. I was proud of him. From then on, the notes came daily. "Call in sick. Take a walk tonight. Don't answer the phone." I obeyed some, ignored others. But every time I disobeyed, I felt his eyes harder, heavier, across the street. One night, after tearing up a note that read, "Don't go out," I stepped onto my porch just to spite him. He was already standing, not sitting anymore. Standing perfectly still, hands at his sides, staring straight at me. The air went cold. I couldn't hold his gaze. I went back inside, shaking, my defiance shriveled to ash. The next morning, a note waited on my kitchen table. Don't do that again. I started losing time. Whole hours gone. I'd look up from the sink, and the clock would jump. A pile of torn notes on the counter I didn't remember shredding. My voicemail full of messages from friends asking if I was okay, why I wasn't answering. Sometimes I'd wake in my chair, staring out the window. He'd be there, on his porch, as always. Sometimes smiling, sometimes not. The breaking point came on a Sunday. I woke to find a note on my pillow. Get rid of the knife. My stomach dropped. The kitchen knife I kept by my bed. My one scrap of defense. I wanted to scream, to rage, to tell him he didn't control me. But my hands moved before my mind decided. I carried the knife outside, across the street, and set it gently on his porch. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched me place it there. When I turned back, the world felt tilted, like gravity had shifted. And when I went inside, another note was waiting on my table. Good. From then on, it wasn't suggestions, it was commands. Don't eat today. Stay inside. Don't look at your phone. I obeyed. I didn't even question it. The fear of disappointing him was worse than hunger, worse than loneliness. The outside world blurred. Work stopped calling. Friends stopped visiting. The only rhythm left was dusk falling. Him stepping onto the porch. Me waiting at the window for the next instruction. I wasn't living anymore. I was waiting. Then came the final note. Trade places. I didn't understand at first. My mind balked, refused to process it. But that night, when the sun went down, I stepped outside. My legs moved without my consent, carrying me across the street. He was waiting, standing. On the porch, his gray windbreaker zipped, eyes locked on mine. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, trembling. What do you want from me? I whispered. His head tilted, the same precise motion as the first time I tried to confront him. And in that moment, I knew the answer. He wanted me to sit. I climbed the steps. My body felt weightless, hollow. I lowered myself onto the chair. The wood creaked under me. He stepped past me, down the steps, across the street, into my house, through my door, without looking back. I sat there all night. At first, I thought I'd get up, run inside, stop him. But my legs wouldn't move, my arms wouldn't lift. I just sat, hands folded in my lap, staring straight ahead. The street was quiet, the houses dark. And when dawn broke, I was still there, still sitting, still watching. I don't know how much time has passed. Days, weeks. The world beyond the porch doesn't matter anymore. The chair holds me, the street holds me. Sometimes I see movement in my old house, my body, no, him, going through the motions of my life, answering calls, cooking meals, laughing in my voice. No one notices the difference. No one ever does. And I stay here, watching, waiting. Because one day, another moving truck will pull up, and someone new will move into the house across the street. I never meant to stay in Briarwood. It was supposed to be a 3-week job, maybe 4, patching up power lines after a storm swept through the Kentucky hills. I'd done gigs like it before, rural towns that needed temporary hands, places where no one from the company wanted to live. The pay was good. The isolation didn't bother me. At least, not at first. But Briarwood was different. Even from the highway, the place felt wrong. The road narrowed to cracked asphalt, trees pressing close on both sides until they seemed to lean in, blotting out the light. The first thing I saw was a half-faded sign. Welcome to Briarwood, founded 1873. Population 214, a number that felt more like a head count than a welcome. The town itself sat in a low valley, roofs sagging, porches crooked. the kind of place that had been slowly bleeding people for decades. I passed a boarded-up school, a church with peeling white paint, a gas station with a single rusted pump. There was no traffic, no kids playing, no dogs barking, just quiet. I pulled up to the inn, the only lodging available, a 3-story clapboard building with a crooked sign that read Briarwood Inn, vacancy. The windows were dark, curtains drawn tight. It looked less like a place for travelers and more like a house that tolerated guests. The innkeeper was waiting at the desk, a woman in her 60s with gray hair pulled into a bun. She smiled when I walked in. Or maybe her mouth smiled. Her eyes didn't. "You'll be staying with us," she said, not asked. I signed the register, scrawled my name, and she slid the key across the counter. Her hand lingered a second too long on mine. Her skin was cold. "3rd floor," she said. "Quiet up there." She said quiet like it was supposed to be comforting. It wasn't. The first night, I couldn't sleep. The room was fine. Bed, dresser, bathroom with a cracked mirror, but the silence was suffocating. I'd stayed in small towns before. There was always something. Crickets, dogs, the hum of traffic. But Briarwood was silent. No wind, no insects, no engines. And then I heard it. Scrape. A faint sound dragging along the wall. I froze. Scrape. Scrape. Like nails or metal, slow and deliberate, moving just beneath the window. I forced myself up, yanked the curtain aside. The street below was empty. The sound stopped. When I finally slept, it was shallow, dreamless. In the morning, I stepped outside to find scratches etched into the siding below my window. Long, shallow grooves, like something had tested the wall. When I asked the innkeeper, she smiled too wide. Old building. Wood warps. That's all. But wood didn't warp in straight, deliberate lines. I tried to shake it off. Work kept me busy. Hours repairing downed poles, running wire, sweating under the pale autumn sun. By the time I got back to town, I was hungry enough to ignore the wrongness in the air. The diner sat at the corner of Main Street. Neon letters buzzed weakly. Eats. Inside, it smelled of coffee and frying oil. A few locals sat at the counter talking in low voices. The waitress came over with a smile that felt stretched too thin. "Welcome to Briarwood," she said, pouring coffee before I even ordered. "Thanks," I said. "Seems like a quiet little town." Her smile twitched. "Quiet. Yes, quiet." She didn't blink. The silence stretched until I looked down at my menu. When I glanced up again, she was still smiling, still staring. I ate fast and left cash on the counter. Day by day, the strangeness grew. At the post office, the clerk counted my change slowly, his fingers brushing mine and holding too long. His eyes didn't blink until mine did. At the gas station, I asked a man for directions to the highway. Left at the turn, he said, then repeated, "Left at the turn, yes." When I drove that way, the road curved back on itself. 10 minutes later, I was back in Briarwood. Every face I passed stared a second too long. Every smile stretched a fraction past natural. Conversations felt rehearsed, like lines read from a script someone had forgotten. The second scraping came 3 nights later. Louder this time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I gripped the wrench I'd borrowed from the truck, my knuckles white. "Who's out there?" I shouted. The sound stopped. Silence pressed against the walls. Then, 3 slow knocks against the glass from the inside. I dropped the wrench, heart pounding. The window was closed, locked. The curtain stirred, though the air was still. By the end of the first week, I avoided the townsfolk, their smiles, their stillness, the way they seemed to echo each other. At the diner one afternoon, I sat in the corner nursing coffee. At the counter, a man in overalls leaned toward the waitress. "Pie's good?" he asked. "It's good," she said, smiling. "Good," he echoed. "It's good," she repeated. They both fell silent, smiling into nothing. When I shifted in my seat, they turned to me in perfect unison, like marionettes tugged by the same string. I left money on the table and walked out without touching the food. The third scraping came louder than ever. This time, it rattled the lamp on the nightstand. I pressed my ear to the plaster. The sound wasn't outside anymore. It was inside the walls. That night, footsteps creaked in the hallway. Slow, dragging. I opened the door, wrench in hand. The hall was empty, but the carpet was indented, as though someone had stood there. I told myself I was losing it. Lack of sleep, isolation, but deep down, I knew the truth. Something was wrong in Briarwood. Something had hollowed it out, and it was working its way toward me. The mirror confirmed it. At first, it was subtle, just a blink out of sync. I raised my hand. The reflection lagged. I smiled. It twitched too wide. I mouthed stop. The reflection mouthed quiet, and then, in a voice that wasn't mine, it whispered through the glass, "You'll get used to it." I staggered back, heart hammering, and threw a blanket over the glass. For 2 days, I couldn't bring myself to uncover it again. I avoided the bathroom, kept every light on, and tried not to see my own face at all. My skin felt wrong, like I wasn't sitting inside my body anymore, like something else was learning how to use me. Every sound made me flinch. The tick of the radiator, the hum of the old light bulb, the faint creak of the building settling. I barely ate, barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection smiling with thoughts that weren't mine. On the third night, the scratching started again. Not on the siding, not inside the walls, but across the ceiling. Sound crawled above me, slow and patient, like fingernails dragging along plaster. I sat in bed, gripping the wrench, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. When the sound reached the corner, directly above the mirror I had covered, it stopped. Silence pressed down so thick I could hear my own pulse. Then softly the blanket over the mirror shifted. Just a twitch, like something had brushed it from the inside. I bolted out of the room and ran down the stairs, wrench still clutched in my hand. The lobby was empty. The innkeeper was nowhere to be seen. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock and the echo of my own footsteps. I almost kept running straight out the front door, but a single lamp glowed on the desk, casting light over the guest book. Curiosity froze me in place. The open page wasn't blank. Under my name, written in the same careful hand as the innkeeper's, was a list. Line after line of names, each one neatly crossed out. Dozens of them. Travelers, workers, people passing through. And at the very bottom, where my name was scrawled, the line was already drawn halfway through, as if someone had started to erase me. I backed away, stomach twisting. I stumbled into the street, desperate for fresh air, but the town wasn't empty. People stood on their porches, motionless, eyes following me in unison. No one spoke, no one moved. They just stared, their faces blank, their smiles fixed like painted dolls. I ran toward the diner, light spilling from its windows, hoping for some sign of normalcy. Inside, a dozen people sat at tables, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The waitress stood behind the counter, still smiling that stretched, unnatural smile. Every head turned toward me at the same second. "Quiet," the waitress said. The word echoed through the diner, repeated in perfect unison by every mouth. "Quiet." I staggered back, slamming into the door. They didn't chase me. They just sat there, smiling, repeating the word until it drilled into my skull. I fled back into the street, heart hammering, lungs burning. That night, I tried to leave again. I loaded my truck, floored the gas, and barreled down the cracked highway. But after 20 minutes, the road curved, and I saw the same gas station I had passed leaving town. The pump glistened in my headlights, the dented car parked outside, the same man sitting in the driver's seat. He lifted his hand in a slow, deliberate wave. His eyes didn't blink. I drove faster, refusing to stop, but when the road bent again, Briarwood spread out in front of me, the inn's crooked sign swinging in the wind. I stumbled back into my room at dawn, exhausted, defeated, and found the mirror uncovered. I swear I hadn't touched the blanket, but it was folded neatly on the floor. My reflection waited for me. It smiled when I didn't. Its lips moved, though mine stayed still. "Almost ready," it whispered. My knees buckled. I fell onto the bed, trembling, too weak to fight. The days blurred after that. I stopped eating, stopped showering. Every time I looked up, I caught my reflection lagging further, like it was learning independence. Sometimes its eyes darted before mine did. Sometimes its smile came first. And sometimes it whispered things I hadn't thought yet. "You'll stay. You belong here. You'll be quiet." The scraping turned constant, not just at night, not just in the walls, but in my head. A dragging, grinding sound that never stopped, like claws carving grooves into my thoughts. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The last night came without warning. I woke to footsteps in the hallway, dozens of them, slow and dragging. The door handle rattled, then turned. The townsfolk filed in silently, one by one, filling the room. Their faces were pale, their eyes too wide, their movements just a fraction off. The innkeeper stood at the front, hands folded, smile twitching. She tilted her head toward the mirror. It was uncovered again. My reflection didn't copy me anymore. It stood on its own, smiling wide, eyes hollow, lips whispering words I couldn't hear. It lifted its hand. My hand didn't move. It stepped forward. The glass rippled like water. Hands gripped my shoulders, holding me in place. I thrashed, screamed, begged, but the townsfolk didn't respond. Their grips were unyielding, their smiles stretched wider. The reflection stepped out of the glass, cold air rushing with it. It looked at me with my face, but wrong, smoother, emptier, perfected in some grotesque way. "You're hollow now," it said in my voice. The townsfolk guided me forward, forcing me into the mirror. My body convulsed, my screams muffled as the glass swallowed me. The last thing I saw before the dark closed in was my reflection stepping into the room, stretching its arms, blinking in a perfect time. When I woke, I was standing in the diner. The waitress smiled. The others sat frozen in place. And when I opened my mouth, the word slipped out before I could stop it. "Quiet." The word echoed back at me from every throat. I looked down at my hands. They were pale, hollow, not mine anymore. And when I finally blinked, my reflection didn't lag behind. It was ahead of me. When I first drove into Grayson Hollow, I told myself the uneasiness was just exhaustion. I'd been on the road 12 hours, hauling equipment for the company I worked for, and the GPS had led me off the interstate and onto a narrow stretch of two-lane highway that seemed to unravel endlessly through farmland. Cornfields spread in every direction, stalks so tall they swallowed the horizon. The sun had gone down an hour before, but the sky still glowed with that deep red afterlight that makes everything look wrong. The sign for the town was so weather-worn, it looked carved out of rot. "Welcome to Grayson Hollow, Pop." 6001. Somebody had scratched the last number into the wood by hand. I slowed as I rolled through, telling myself I'd just grab gas, maybe a coffee, and keep going. But something about the town made me press my foot harder on the brake. Every house I passed had a light in the window. Not just one. Every window lit, glowing like lanterns, so bright they hurt my eyes. And people were sitting in the windows too. Not standing, not moving around, just sitting, watching. Their heads turned as my truck rolled by. Some of them smiled. At the corner by the feed store, an old man in overalls lifted his hand in a slow wave. His lips moved. And though my windows were up, I swore I heard it clear, as if he whispered in my ear. Harvest time. The gas station was empty. No attendant, no cars. The single pump looked 30 years out of date. I tried the card reader, but it was dead. I swore under my breath, already planning to head back to the highway, when the door to the little station swung open. A woman stepped out, her apron smeared with something dark. She smiled too wide, teeth flashing in the fluorescent light. "You'll be wanting a fill-up," she said, not asked. "Yeah," I said. "Card reader's not working." She chuckled low in her throat, shaking her head. We don't use those here. Inside. Cash only. I didn't like the way she said we. Still, I needed gas. I followed her in. The station smelled sweet. Not gasoline or oil. Sweeter, cloying, like fruit gone overripe. Jars lined the shelves, glass cloudy with preserves I couldn't identify. Some looked like jam, others like thick syrup with husks of something floating inside. I caught myself holding my breath. She rang me up without asking how much I needed. When I pulled out a 20, her fingers lingered on mine. Her skin was warm, too warm, like she'd just come in from the sun. "You'll want to eat too," she said softly. "Long road, long night. Diner's still open." I nodded just to get out of there, tank full, the taste of that sweetness clinging to the back of my throat. The diner sat at the far end of Main Street. A neon sign buzzed overhead. Eats. Same as the one in Briarwood, but older, sicklier, like it had been humming in the same spot for 50 years, without rest. Inside, every booth was full. Men, women, children, all of them eating, but not talking. Forks rising and falling in perfect rhythm. A thick stew filled their bowls, steam curling into the air. I slid into the only open booth, suddenly aware of how every set of eyes lifted in unison to look at me. The waitress came over without a pad, without asking. She set a bowl in front of me, the same stew. "On the house," she said. I stared at it. Chunks of meat, kernels of corn, something that might have been beans. The smell was rich, earthy, almost metallic. "I didn't order," I started. Her smile widened. "Everyone eats." The entire diner paused, forks suspended, waiting. I felt heat climb my neck. Against my better judgment, I picked up the spoon. The first bite was thick, heavy, so flavorful it almost made me gag. Sweet and savory, but wrong, like it coated my tongue in wax. The room relaxed. Forks clattered again in unison. The waitress leaned close, her breath hot against my ear. "You'll be ready soon." That night, I checked into the only motel. The clerk behind the counter slid me a key without asking for a name or ID. "Room 4, he said. "You'll want to rest. Tomorrow's a big day." I didn't ask what he meant. My throat still tasted of stew. The room was plain, clean enough. But the moment I lay down, sleep crashed over me like a wave. It wasn't normal exhaustion. My body felt drugged, heavy, sinking into the mattress. My dreams were thick with whispers, voices I didn't recognize repeating the same phrase over and over. Harvest time. Harvest time. Harvest time. When I woke, the sheets were damp with sweat. My body ached like I'd been working fields all night. The next day, I tried to leave. My truck roared to life, headlights cutting through the cornfields. I found the road back to the highway and pressed the pedal down. The town shrank in my rearview mirror, my chest finally loosening. But 20 minutes later, the fields opened up, and there it was again. The feed store, the gas station, the diner with its buzzing neon sign, Grayson Hollow. The same man in overalls stood at the corner, hand lifting in a slow wave. Harvest time. My stomach dropped. I kept driving, swearing I wouldn't stop, but every road curved back to the town. No matter which turn I took, the streets of Grayson Hollow rose up again before me. By dusk, I was too exhausted to try anymore. I pulled into the motel, my hand shaking on the wheel. The clerk smiled as if I'd just come home. "You'll get used to it," he said softly. That night, I woke to a sound outside my window. At first, I thought it was wind, but when I pulled the curtain back, I saw them. Dozens of townsfolk standing in the cornfields behind the motel, shoulder to shoulder, perfectly still. Their faces were tilted toward the sky, eyes reflecting the moonlight. None of them moved. None of them blinked. They just stood there, rows and rows of them, like part of the crop itself. I backed, away from the window, pulse hammering. The whisper of stalks shifting reached me, though the air was still. And then, all at once, every head turned toward my room. I didn't sleep. When dawn came, I walked into the diner, desperate for coffee, for something normal. The waitress brought me another bowl of stew without asking. This time, when I refused, the room fell silent. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. "You have to eat," she said flatly. "I'm not hungry. I muttered. The silence deepened. A little boy at the counter lowered his spoon. His smile was identical to the waitress's. The man in the booth beside me leaned close, his breath sour with sweetness. You can't grow without feeding, and the harvest man don't take kindly to the unripe. I shoved away from the table, nearly tripping over the doorframe as I bolted outside. The entire diner rose in unison, footsteps heavy behind me. I barely made it into my truck before the first fist struck the glass. They didn't chase me when I tore down the road. They just stood in the street watching, lips moving in unison, voices carrying on the wind. Not ready. Not yet. Not ready. I locked myself in the motel and didn't come out again. My body felt heavy, like the stew I'd eaten was still inside me, thick and clinging, refusing to digest. My skin tingled with a faint burn, especially under the nails, as though something was growing there. I kept the curtains drawn, the door bolted, and the TV on to drown out the silence, but it didn't help. Grayson Hollow wasn't quiet. Not really. The town breathed around me. I could hear it in the walls of the motel, in the floorboards beneath the bed, in the hollow echo when I pressed my ear against the door. The second night, a knock came at 3 a.m. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I froze, clutching the chair leg I'd torn loose to use as a weapon. The knock came again, softer this time. Then a voice. "You'll rot if you hide." I pressed my back to the wall, heart in my throat. Whoever it was didn't knock again. But in the morning, when I opened the door, a bowl of stew sat steaming on the welcome mat, and dozens of flies already clung to it. I tried to leave again. This time, I didn't take the truck. I walked. Out of town, down the cracked asphalt through the fields. The corn stretched tall on either side, leaves brushing my shoulders, closing me in. I walked until my legs screamed, until sweat poured down my spine. Hours passed. The sun dipped low, and then, up ahead, the lights of Grayson Hollow flickered into view. I had circled back without turning. The man in overalls waited at the corner, lifting his hand in that same slow wave. His lips moved in the same whisper. Harvest time. That night, the fields were alive with movement. I woke to a sound like wind rushing through the stalks, but when I pulled the curtain aside, I saw the truth. The townsfolk stood in perfect rows, shoulder to shoulder, arms at their sides, faces tilted to the moon, but they weren't still this time. Their bodies swayed in unison side to side like plants caught in a phantom breeze. The sound wasn't wind, it was voices, dozens of them, humming low and steady, vibrating through the earth. And then the stalks parted. Something moved between them, taller than the others, broad-shouldered, and wrapped in what looked like burlap. A wide hat shadowed its face. Its hands were long, too long, dragging along the soil as it walked. The people parted for it the way crops bend from a harvester's blade. The harvest man. Even from the window, I felt its presence pressing against me, heavy as stone. Its head turned slowly, and I swear it saw me. Its mouth didn't move, but its voice crawled inside my skull. "You are not ready." The rows of people bowed their heads in unison. I stumbled back, gagging, bile rising in my throat. The air smelled of wet earth and blood. By morning, I knew I couldn't stay. The motel was poisoned. The food, the water, the very air made me sluggish, made my thoughts blur. My skin crawled like something wriggled just beneath the surface. I packed my bag and left without checking out. I walked to the diner, not because I wanted to, but because I felt pulled. Inside, the booths were full again, every table occupied. Bowls of stew steamed in front of each patron. The waitress stood at the counter, her smile wide, her apron clean. When I entered, the room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. "You must eat," the waitress said. I shook my head, backing toward the door. "I'm leaving." The man nearest me leaned close, his breath hot, sour sweet. "You can't leave. You're in the soil now." I shoved past him, bursting into the street. People stood outside too, on porches, in yards, in the road itself, watching me, smiling. "You'll spoil if you don't finish," someone whispered. The ground under my feet seemed to pulse. The asphalt buckled faintly. like it wasn't solid anymore, but skin stretched tight over something alive. That evening, the harvest began. I didn't choose to watch. The townsfolk came for me, dozens of them, their grip strong and unyielding as they dragged me from the motel and into the fields. I fought, kicked, screamed, but their faces never changed. Smiles stretched wide, eyes glassy, mouths murmuring the same word over and over. Harvest, harvest, harvest. They pulled me between the stalks, deeper into the fields than I thought possible. The corn gave way to an open clearing, and in the center stood rows of wooden poles. My stomach twisted when I realized they weren't for crops. They were for people. Bodies hung from the poles, their skin pale, veins thick with roots that pierced through arms and legs and sank into the soil. Their eyes were open, lips moving faintly, whispering in a language I didn't understand. Some of them were still alive. Their fingers twitched, their mouths worked soundlessly, pleading. I gagged, bile burning my throat. The harvest man stood at the far end, taller than any human should be, its burlap robe stained with earth and blood. Its wide hat shadowed a face I couldn't see. In its hand was a scythe, the blade long and rusted. The people around me pushed me forward. My knees buckled. I fell to the soil, my palms sinking into dirt that pulsed like muscle. You are almost ripe, the voice crawled into my skull again. One more season. Roots writhed beneath the soil, coiling around my wrists, tugging gently, almost lovingly. The air was heavy with the stench of rot and sweetness. The harvest man raised the scythe, not toward me, toward one of the hanging bodies. With a single motion, it sliced the throat open. Dark fluid spilled, thick and sweet, sinking into the soil. The earth drank it greedily. The roots around my wrist pulsed, tightening. The crowd sighed in unison, a sound of deep satisfaction. I screamed until my voice broke. When I woke, I was back in the motel room, lying on the bed, clothes damp with soil. My throat was raw. My hands ached where roots had wrapped them. On the nightstand sat a bowl of stew, still steaming, as if waiting for me. On the mirror above the dresser, words were scrawled in something dark, dripping slowly down the glass. Eat, or the soil will. I dropped to my knees and sobbed until dawn. The next day, the town carried on like nothing had happened. The diner was full. The gas station pump wheezed and rattled. Children played in the dirt with smiles too wide for their faces. Everyone greeted me with the same words, their voices overlapping until it felt like the whole town spoke through one mouth. Harvest time. I didn't eat again. Couldn't. My stomach churned at the thought, but the longer I went without, the weaker I became. My skin grew pale. My nails darkened. My veins itched as though something moved inside them. By the end of the week, I couldn't leave the bed. My body felt heavy, pinned to the mattress, my breath shallow. Through the window, I saw the harvest man watching from the edge of the field. "You are ready," the voice whispered in my skull. Tonight, when darkness fell, they came for me again, smiling, murmuring, guiding me gently into the fields. The poles stood waiting. The soil pulsed underfoot. This time, I didn't fight. The roots welcomed me, sliding into my skin, drinking me dry. My voice slipped from my throat in a whisper I couldn't stop. Harvest, harvest, harvest. And as the scythe rose over me, I realized the truth. I was never a visitor here. I was a crop. I came to Vermont in the fall of 2019, chasing a contract job that promised steady pay and a chance to get away from city noise. The town was called Ashfield, a little place tucked into the green hills and already hollowed by time. One gas station, one diner, a few brick storefronts sagging under faded awnings. It looked like every other New England town I'd passed through, the kind you forget about a mile after you leave. But Ashfield had a reputation. I didn't know it when I first rolled in, but I learned quickly enough. People there didn't talk about the weather. They didn't talk about the Red Sox or politics or the foliage. They all carried the same quiet shadow in their voices, and it always circled back to one place: the house at the edge of town. I first heard about it from the woman who ran the inn. She was friendly enough when I checked in. A thin smile, a room key, a reminder that breakfast ended at 8. But when she saw the work order in my hand, she paused. My company was repairing fiber lines along the county road, which meant I'd be working right near the property line where the house stood. "You stay clear of it," she told me flatly. "Don't even look through the windows." I laughed, because what else do you do when someone gives you a warning like that? "What's in the house?" Her eyes didn't blink. "Names," she said. And then she turned and walked away. The story followed me everywhere. At the diner, the waitress filled my coffee and asked where I was staying. When I mentioned the inn, she nodded and asked if I'd seen the house yet. When I told her no, she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "It writes you," she said. "Before you know it, you're already there." She wouldn't say more. None of them would. Everyone I asked gave me the same answer: stay away. Nobody told me why. That silence was worse than any ghost story. On my third day, I gave in to curiosity. After work, I followed the road, out past the gas station and down toward the edge of town. The trees opened into a clearing, and there it was. The house was sagging, 3 stories of rotted wood and boarded windows, its roof caved in at one corner. The porch leaned forward, as if the whole building wanted to collapse into the dirt. The yard was overgrown, weeds as tall as my chest. No tire tracks, no footprints. It looked abandoned for decades, but the air around it felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I stood at the edge of the clearing, staring, telling myself I'd just look for a minute, just to satisfy the itch. The wind shifted, rattling the boards, and for a moment I thought I heard something. A whisper, so faint it could have been the leaves. My name. I went inside the next day. I told myself it was just a house, just wood and plaster and bad stories told over coffee. The front door hung crooked, the knob cold in my hand. When I pushed it open, the smell hit me first. Not mold, not dust, ink. A sharp metallic tang that stung my throat. The foyer was dim, light spilling through cracks in the boards, and every inch of wall was covered. Names, layer after layer written in pencil, pen, paint, carved into wood, scratched into plaster. Thousands of names, climbing from floor to ceiling, scrawled across doorframes and stair rails, etched into the floorboards beneath my boots. Some were faded to nothing, ghosts of letters barely visible. Others looked fresh, ink still glistening wet. I walked through the house in a daze. Every room was the same: bedrooms, hallways, kitchen, all covered in names. And then I saw it, my own, scrawled across the wall of the living room in thick black strokes. Not once, not twice. Dozens of times. Each one darker, heavier, bigger, as if the house had been practicing. As if it had been writing me over and over until it got me right. My knees went weak. I backed away until my spine hit the opposite wall, only to feel more names pressing into me through the plaster. My chest heaved. The air was too thick. I stumbled out of the house, heart pounding, and didn't stop until I was back in town. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen. I didn't have to. They already knew. The waitress slid coffee across the counter the next morning without a word, her hand trembling just slightly. The man at the gas station looked at me too long when I paid. Even the innkeeper, who barely spoke, shook her head when I came in that night. "You shouldn't have gone in," she murmured. "Now it'll keep you." That night, I dreamed of walls closing in, names crawling across them like insects. My name at the center, swelling, pulsing. When I woke, the sheets were damp, and my throat ached like I'd been screaming. I swore I'd leave the next morning, but when I packed my truck and headed down the highway, every turn brought me back to the same place. The clearing, the house, always waiting. I tried 3 different roads, drove for hours, and every time the trees opened and the house loomed in front of me again. Each time I passed, I saw something new. The first time, Just the house. The second, a shape in the upstairs window. The third, letters darkening across the porch boards as if written by an invisible hand. My name. I stopped going into town. The stairs, the silence. It was too much. I stayed in my room at the inn, curtains drawn, lights on. But even there, I couldn't escape it. Scratches appeared on the walls at night, faint at first, then darker. My name etched into the paint. When I tore down a strip of wallpaper, I found more names underneath, carved into the wood. The TV cut out mid-sentence. The radio spat only static. And through it all, I heard the same thing. Whispers. Thousands of them. Speaking one word. My name. By the end of the week, I couldn't tell if I was dreaming or awake. I'd close my eyes and see the house, open them and see the same. I stopped eating. I stopped shaving. I just sat on the edge of the bed, listening, waiting. And then, one night, I realized the whispers weren't outside. They were coming from inside my own head. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it didn't matter. The voices were in my skull, layered over each other, every one of them saying my name in different tones, different eras, different breaths. Men, women, children. My name repeated 1,000 ways. And underneath, buried deep, was another voice, louder, closer. You belong to the house. I dropped to my knees, clutching my head, screaming until my throat tore raw. When I looked up, the room was dark. The wallpaper peeled on its own, curling away in strips. Beneath it, fresh and wet, as if written that second, was my name again. And it was still moving. Letter by letter, the wall kept writing. Something inside me broke. I didn't run. I didn't even scream. I just sat on the floor, back against the bed, watching the letters scrawl across the plaster in strokes too sharp to be human. My name stretched wider and darker with every pass, the ink gleaming wet in the dim light. When the sun rose, the writing stopped. The wall was covered now, every inch of it. My name layered over itself 100 times until the letters blurred into a dark, pulsing mass. I stumbled out into the hallway, desperate for air, but it was no better there. The wallpaper was peeling away in sheets, and beneath it, more names waited. Thousands of them, stacked in neat lines like a ledger. Some scratched faint and shallow, as though the house had lost interest. Others, carved deep, gouged into the wood, as if to make sure they would never fade. And then, I saw it. My name again, just 3 doors down. Fresh, wet, as though someone had just dragged a brush through it. I went downstairs. The innkeeper was gone. The lobby empty. No cars outside. No voices in town. When I walked through Main Street, the diner doors were open, but the booths were vacant. The gas station was lit, but no one was inside. It was as if the entire town had been erased overnight. And maybe it had. I don't know how long I wandered that day. Hours, maybe. Time didn't matter anymore. Every road curved back to the clearing. Every step carried me closer to the house. By dusk, I was standing at its porch again, staring at the door hanging crooked on its rusted hinges. I told myself not to go inside, but the whisper was already there, threading through my skull, warm and intimate. You belong to the house. The boards creaked as I crossed the threshold. The smell hit me again, sharp ink, iron, and something sweet, cloying, like rotting fruit. The foyer seemed darker than before, the light outside bending away as though it refused to enter. I stepped forward, every nerve in my body screaming, but my legs moved on their own. Every wall writhed with names. The letters shifted and blurred as though alive, crawling over one another, swallowing the faint and etching the bold even deeper. When I brushed my hand against the plaster, it came away wet, stained black. The whispers swelled. Hundreds of voices speaking at once, weaving into each other until I couldn't tell where one ended and the next began. They were all saying my name, and then between them another voice rose, louder, deeper, vibrating through the house itself. You're ready. The living room floor buckled, plaster cracked, wallpaper splitting like skin. I stumbled back as the boards curled upward, revealing layers beneath. I thought I'd find brick or stone. Instead, I saw more names, carved not into wood, but into something pale, fibrous, stretched taut like parchment. Flesh. I clawed at it, ripping wallpaper and plaster aside until the truth revealed itself. The house wasn't built of wood and stone. It was built of skin, muscle, and bone. The walls were made of what it had taken, every name etched into the tissue of those who'd come before me. The whispers grew frantic, hissing, pleading. I pressed my hands over my ears, but they came from inside me now, deep in my skull. I staggered upstairs, desperate for escape, but the halls only narrowed. Doors slammed shut behind me. The wallpaper writhed, names swelling larger, darker, until all I saw was mine, letter after letter, my name written so large it filled the hall. I reached the final door at the end of the corridor. My hands shook as I pushed it open. Inside was a single room, empty except for one wall. My name filled it, floor to ceiling, carved deep enough to bleed. And then it began to move. The letters swelled, black ink dripping onto the floor, pooling at my feet. My name shifted, folding, reshaping until it wasn't letters anymore. It was a mouth. The wall opened. The room filled with a wet sucking sound as the plaster tore wide, revealing layers of glistening red beneath. The mouth stretched tall, lined not with teeth, but with broken bones jutting outward. From its depths, I saw faces pressed into the flesh. Eyes, mouths, twisted expressions screaming silently from inside the wall. The voices overlapped, thousands of them, whispering names over and over. And all at once they fell silent. The mouth spoke with one voice. You are written. You are kept. The floor gave way beneath me. I fell into darkness, landing hard on something soft that shifted under my weight. My hand shot out and touched not earth, not stone, but flesh. Warm, pulsing, veined with lines of ink. Around me, I saw them. Bodies. Hundreds, maybe thousands, pressed into the walls, into the floor, half merged, half swallowed. Their eyes were open. Their mouths moved faintly, whispering names that had already been erased. I tried to crawl away, but hands erupted from the walls, pale and slick, clutching my arms and legs. The ink rose higher, filling my throat, flooding my lungs. My body convulsed, every nerve screaming. And then I wasn't screaming anymore. I was whispering. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the foyer. The walls were clean now, empty. No names, no scratches, no ink, just pale plaster, smooth and new. The whispers were gone. I thought I'd escaped until I saw it. On the wall by the door, written in letters so black they glistened. You are the house. My hand shook as I reached out. The ink was wet. My name bled through it, deeper and deeper, until the wall trembled beneath my touch. And when I turned to the window, I saw them outside. Travelers. Strangers. A new family moving into town. The children ran ahead, pointing at the sagging house on the hill, and when I tried to scream to warn them, the walls spoke for me. Thousands of voices in unison, mine among them. Come inside. Your name is already here.